Hello there. I'm beginning a new section in my YouTube channel which is going to be devoted to reviews of just one book per video. And I would like to start with Hardy's Mathematician's Apology. This is actually my third attempt at making the video, and they say third's the charm, so let's see if the review goes efficiently. So first things first, who is G.H. Hardy? What is this book about? Well, first of all, this book was published, not this one that I have in my hand, but the original was published in 1940 in Great Britain. G.H. Hardy is probably one of the most important British mathematicians of the first half of the 20th century, and he collaborated a lot with Littlewood. He was a number theorist, but probably his claim to modern fame today would be from his having discovered Ramanujan, with whom he also collaborated until the latter's death. And now this book, A Mathematician's Apology, let's explain the title a little bit. So apology here is meant in the Greek sense, like in Plato's Apology of Socrates. It's meant to be a defense of mathematics. So this book is going to do exactly that sort of thing. It's going to make a case for the virtues of mathematics, and it's going to take a very unusual take. Even before reading, I knew that Hardy was unusual in that instead of the expected defense of mathematics, as you know, as Mathematics as the Language of Nature, the book of Galileo's quote, the book of nature is written in mathematical language. Instead of going through that line or talking about the applications of mathematics, he follows a completely different line, a very humanistic one, in fact, appreciating mathematics as an art of sorts. Okay, as for this edition, this is part of the collection Canto Classics, published by Cambridge University Press. I don't think they have gone out of their way to make a very fancy edition. In fact, from the printing type, I get the impression that, this was just scanned from probably the last edition that was properly edited, probably in 1967. The book is not very big. It's got a total of 153 pages, and I think about half of them, at least, are an introduction by C.P. Snow. The introduction is very interesting. It gives you a biographical portrait of G.H. Hardy, and I really didn't know much about his life until I read that introduction. One of the main takes I took from it, which I hadn't known before, was that he was quite a staunch pacifist, and this brought him trouble both in the First and in the Second World Wars. Okay, let's go on now to explaining the reasons why Hardy wrote this book. This takes us to what is probably the first main theme of this book. This is an elegiac book that laments the passing away of Hardy's mathematical skill. And this is explained both in the introduction and in the first pages written by Hardy. So the thesis is that mathematics is a young man's game, that after a certain age, which is generally situated in the 40s, mathematical productivity starts to go downhill pretty quickly. Now, Hardy was feeling that in the 1940s he had just lost it. He had had a relatively long and productive and satisfactory life in mathematics, but he's lost it. And he got into a depression, and the situation would only become worse in the following years. So he was persuaded to write this book. And this book is, as we mentioned before, it's a defense of mathematics, but it also starts as a sort of elegiac lament for Hardy's satisfactory and happy life when he could create good mathematics. This idea that mathematics is a young man's game, or a young woman's game, is still pretty much current, I believe. And I imagine this book contributed quite a lot to crystallizing it and to publicizing it. It is no accident that the most prestigious prize in mathematics, the Fields Medal, is given to mathematicians under 40. And it is true that now there is another prize, the Abel, but I'm not completely sure that it has actually displaced in prestige the Fields Medal. But anyway, so that's the first main topic of this book. Now that Hardy can no longer produce mathematics at a professional level, he finds some mild but insufficient consolation in just making a defense of his discipline and in trying to explain the beauty and the value of mathematics to the lay public. This is important also. This is a book that is conceived, I suspect, for a lay public. It's not a book that requires any complex level of mathematics to understand. It has two mathematical proofs: the proof of the rationality of the square root of 2 and of the infinity of the prime numbers. They're pretty simple proofs that can be understood by almost anybody with a secondary school level of mathematics. So it's meant to be a book that explains the virtues and the aesthetics and the value of mathematics to non-mathematicians. And as I said, if you're a non-mathematician, you will be able to read this book and understand it perfectly. Your biggest issue might be, and that was the biggest I encountered myself, that it's chock full of references to figures who would have been well known to contemporaries of this book in the 1940s, English people for the most part, and without footnotes. Most of those references are pretty obscure to me. References to writers, physicists, other mathematicians, other people, etc. For example, Professor Hogben. I have no idea who Professor Hogben is. And he appears a couple of times, more than a couple of times. Anyway, let's move to the main body of the work. So in most of the book, we have, as we said, a defense of mathematics. And the defense is rather controversial. The arguments that Hardy makes are basically three. So the first argument, and the most surprising one, is harmlessness. As we said, Hardy was a pacifist. So what he basically says is that mathematics as he understands it, and we will go into details about that a little later on in the review, real mathematics with a capital M, which he understands to be basically pure and not too applied, real mathematics is harmless. It's as opposed to chemistry or physics, which can be used pretty immediately for doing damage. Mathematics is pure enough to be relatively harmless, and so therefore its virtue comes from the fact that it cannot be easily instrumentalized towards doing things in the world, including evil things. The second argument he makes is that mathematics is a worthy field for self-realization. He says, even though it's harmless, this does not mean that mathematics is simple or easy. It's a complex field, a field where you can satisfy your curiosity. It is demanding, and if you have the talent, and again, this connects, not only does Hardy think there is a time limit, post-expiry date for being a mathematician, he believes that some people are born with a higher mathematical talent than others. In fact, some are geniuses. And the most appropriate thing a mathematical genius or a talented person in mathematics, the most interesting or relevant thing that person should do is work in mathematics. And, he or she will find in this field an area of self-realization because, as we said, mathematics is a curious field of endeavor where the discoveries are far from trivial. It's very demanding because it's difficult, even if you have the genius and you are under the age cap. And it has another advantage, which some other fields of endeavor do not have. It's eternal. Like the truths of mathematics are eternal and never changing, as opposed to the truths of biology and physics, which work within scientific paradigms that after 100 or 200 years become obsolete, or as opposed to worldly success, where, you might be Elon Musk, but who will remember Elon Musk 100 years from now, or 200 years from now? And yet we still remember Gauss and Pythagoras. So the first argument was harmlessness. The second one was worthiness and self-realization. The third argument in defense of mathematics is beauty, and this takes a peculiarly weird aesthetic rabbit hole, which is rather difficult to follow. So Hardy doesn't quite explain in a clear manner what he understands to be mathematical beauty. Some ideas that he points in, or some pointers, that he develops for achieving or trying to achieve an understanding of what mathematical beauty might be, include ideas like unexpectedness. So when a mathematical theorem arrives at a proof and proves something that might feel counterintuitive, that is an element of its beauty. He also talks about inevitability, like once you've seen the proof and you follow the steps, it it feels like it could not have been otherwise. He also mentions economy. The simpler, the proof should be as simple as possible, but no simpler than that. So the simpler you can make it, because sometimes you can make very complex or cumbersome proofs of maybe a theorem. But if there is an easier, simpler way, or not simpler necessarily, but a more direct way, more elegant is the term mathematicians generally use, this would contribute to its beauty. So the metaphor Hardy uses is, mathematical beauty is not so much a star-studded vault of heaven, but a constellation where all the different pieces form this arc of beauty, if you wish. Not only beauty, he also insists a lot on seriousness, and here he contrasts mathematics with more frivolous pursuits, and he insists on comparing it a lot, for example, with chess, to the detriment of chess. And his argument here, seriousness again, is difficult to explain. I think what he meant by seriousness was more like, well, he explains that seriousness consists of two elements, basically, which could be viewed as like a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. So generality is part of the seriousness of mathematics, and means that a mathematical theorem or a part of mathematics is not just accidental or episodic. It's united to other branches of mathematics. That's the horizontal dimension. So this theorem might have ramifications and connections to completely different and apparently unrelated areas of mathematics. And depth is also referenced. Depth in this case would be a vertical dimension, and it's similar to generality, but with respect to the foundations of the discipline. So mathematical proof or a theorem has depth when it somehow is able to connect with the very foundational aspects of the discipline. And both beauty and seriousness are also arguments that he makes in favor of appreciating mathematics as an art. Okay, to conclude, let's move to the last major topic, which is a clarification of what Hardy means by utility. Before reading this book, I came to it because it's a very famous one, but I knew that Hardy was controversial for his very cavalier attitude towards pragmatic uses of mathematics. And in this, I was probably looking for a contrast to another mathematician whose books I've read, Maurice Klein, a very good writer of popular mathematical books, but he really, really, really enervates me and makes me angry with his very, very utilitarian view of mathematics and his complete disdain for 20th century mathematics. So I was searching here for the opposite, the complete opposite. A man saying, I have no interest in the applications of mathematics, and that matches well. I'm a humanities person, so it matches well with my own intuitive mindset of evaluating and appreciating things that have no pragmatic value. But anyway, going back to the question of utility, this needs to be explained. So we said before that Hardy thinks that real mathematics is not utilitarian, and it's useless. What does he mean by this? Well, it's important to see that he is not making the distinction between pure and applied mathematics. In fact, he explains in the latter part of the book that he considers both pure and applied mathematics as mathematics with big M. Their opposite would be elementary, dull mathematics, and I think he is thinking about the type of mathematics that engineers do, the mathematics that gets taught in secondary school, algebra, geometry, maybe some calculus, but things that are not too creative. They're just applying the basic mathematical structures and machinery to solving real world problems. And he thinks this mathematics is useful in a bad sense, but he thinks that the good mathematics, the useless math, is the one that is a noble enterprise in which he indulged. As we said, useless mathematics can be applied or pure. Perhaps the difference he traces between these two is, for him, pure mathematics is about, following theorems, exploring models, universes, worlds that have no connection with our physical real world. And he would say applied mathematics is pretty similar. It also explores pure independent models, constructions, structures. But in the case of the applied mathematician, he also tries to find which of these seem to parallel, seem to mirror, seem to explain efficiently the patterns that also appear in our physical world. He gives us an example of applied mathematics that he appreciates, general relativity and quantum mechanics. And this feels a bit dated because quantum mechanics was being used for, for the Manhattan Project at the time in which he was writing and publishing this book. Well, about to be used. And we know today that general relativity has practical applications, like in GPS. Even number theory, which was his darling and his field of work, which at that time feels so abstracted, independent from anything practical, is used today for a lot of practical applications. Not as much as other branches of mathematics, but cryptography depends completely on number theory. So, well, that's an interesting reversal of Hardy's beliefs. Overall, would I recommend the book? How do I assess it? It's a good book. I recommend everybody who's interested in mathematics to read it. It takes a rather unusual take on the topic, as I said, with a defense of mathematics as one of the fine arts, you could say. And yeah, give it a look.